Captain Lee Minho was having the worst week of his life. His salvage ship Iron Wolf had been floating around the outer rim for 3 days without finding a single piece of valuable scrap. The fuel gauge was getting dangerously low, and his food supplies were running out faster than he'd planned. Just when he was about to turn back toward the nearest space station, his communication system started beeping like crazy. A distress signal. Finally, something that might pay the bills. Minho rubbed his tired eyes and checked the scanner. The signal was coming from about 2 hours away, near an asteroid field that most ships avoided. Smart captains stayed away from those rocks, but desperate salvage operators like Minho sometimes had to take risks. He fired up the engines and headed toward the source. What he found there made his jaw drop. The ship sending the distress signal wasn't some broken-down cargo hauler or mining vessel. It was sleek, elegant, and definitely not human-made. The hull gleamed with a strange metallic finish that seemed to shift colors in the starlight. Minho had seen Altarian ships before, but only in news broadcasts and military reports. This was the first time he'd been close enough to touch one. As he got closer, he could see damage along the ship's side. Scorch marks and twisted metal told the story of an attack. Someone had definitely tried to destroy this vessel, but it had somehow survived. The question was whether anyone inside had made it through. Minho docked his ship carefully and put on his spacesuit. The airlock hissed as he moved from his cramped salvage vessel into the Altarian ship. The difference was immediate. Everything inside was smooth, curved, and somehow alive-looking. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint light, and the air had a sweet, almost floral smell. He found her in what looked like the command center. Princess Kira Velnith was slumped over a control panel, her silver-scaled skin pale and her breathing shallow. Minho had never seen an Altarian up close before. She was tall, much taller than him, with elongated limbs and features that were both alien and strangely beautiful. Her eyes, when they fluttered open, glowed with a soft blue light. "Human," she whispered in accented English. "You came?" "Yeah, I got your distress call," Minho said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "What happened here?" "Sabotage," she managed to say. "My own people. They tried to kill me." Before Minho could ask more questions, alarms started, a blaring from both ships. He rushed to the viewport and saw chunks of debris floating toward them. The asteroid field was unstable, and their ships were right in the danger zone. "We need to move now," he shouted. But as he ran back to his ship, a massive piece of rock slammed into the Iron Wolf's engine section. Sparks flew, and the lights flickered before going out completely. Minho stared in horror at his damaged vessel. The engines were dead, the communication array was smashed, and their life support systems were failing fast. They were stranded, millions of miles from the nearest space station, with barely enough supplies to last a week. Her human salvage captain and an alien princess, trapped together in the cold darkness of space with no way home. The first 24 hours were brutal. Princess Kira made it clear from the start that she considered humans to be barely civilized creatures who had somehow stumbled into space travel. She wrinkled her nose at Minho's instant coffee, complained about the temperature in his ship, and kept muttering in her own language whenever he did anything. "Your species builds everything so crude," she said, running her long fingers over his control panel. "These buttons are so large and clumsy. Do you not have neural interfaces?" Minho gritted his teeth as he worked on connecting their life support systems. "These crude buttons have kept me alive for 10 years in space, Your Highness. Maybe focus less on complaining and more on helping." "I am royalty. I do not perform manual labor." "Well, congratulations. You're about to learn." Minho threw a wrench in her direction. "Because if we don't get these systems working together, we're both going to die out here. And dead royalty is still dead." Kira caught the wrench with surprising grace, her glowing eyes narrowing. For a moment, Minho thought she might throw it back at his head. Instead, she examined it carefully, turning it over in her hands like she'd never seen such a primitive tool. The next few hours were painful to watch. Kira clearly had knowledge about advanced technology that made Minho's equipment look like Stone Age tools. She kept talking about bio-neural networks and quantum field manipulators, but she couldn't figure out how to use a simple screwdriver. Meanwhile, Minho could fix anything with spare parts and determination, but her ship's technology might as well have been magic. "This is impossible," Kira said, after her third failed attempt to interface with his computer system. "Your technology is so backward that my neural implants cannot even recognize it. And your fancy brain-computer stuff is useless when we need to actually fix things with our hands," Minho shot back. "Maybe if your people spent less time thinking they're superior and more time learning practical skills, you wouldn't be stranded out here." But slowly, something started to change. When Minho showed Kira how to manually adjust the oxygen recyclers, she watched carefully and remembered every step. When she explained how her ship's biosystems worked, Minho found ways to jury-rig connections between their different technologies. His practical problem-solving approach started to make sense to her scientific mind. "You think very directly," she admitted as they worked side by side in the cramped engine room. "Your solutions are inelegant, but they work." "Sometimes the ugly answer is the right answer," Minho replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Pretty doesn't keep you breathing in space." They were making real progress when disaster struck. Minho was reaching for a loose cable at the same time Kira was adjusting a bio-node. Their hands touched for just a split second. Kira jerked back like she'd been electrocuted, her silver scales flashing bright white. She stared at him in absolute horror, backing away until she hit the wall. You touched me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Yeah, so what? It was an accident. Unmarried contact between species is forbidden. You have violated sacred law." Minho stared at her in disbelief. "Lady, we're stranded in space, probably going to die out here, and you're worried about accidentally bumping hands?" But Kira had already retreated to the far corner of the room, her whole body trembling. Whatever taboo he'd just broken, it was clearly a big deal in her culture. Minho sighed and went back to work alone, wondering how they were ever going to survive when a simple touch could cause such drama. 3 weeks into their isolation, Minho and Kira had settled into an awkward routine. They worked together during the day, carefully maintaining distance after the hand-touching incident, and retreated to opposite ends of the ship at night. The silence was driving Minho crazy. "So," he said one evening as they shared a meal of recycled protein bars and filtered water, "what's it actually like being a princess? All fancy parties and people bowing to you?" Kira looked surprised by the question. She'd been quietly picking at her food, lost in thought. "It is not what you might imagine. Try me." She was quiet for so long that Minho thought she wouldn't answer. Then she started talking, and once she began, the words seemed to pour out of her. "Every day is planned from the moment I wake up. What I wear, who I speak to, what I say, even how I hold my hands when I walk. There are servants who dress me, advisors who tell me what to think, and guards who follow me everywhere." Her glowing eyes dimmed slightly. "I have never been alone until now, never made a real choice for myself." Minho studied her face. "That sounds awful. The worst part is the waste of it all. I have 3 advanced degrees in xenobiology and cultural studies, but my father thinks education is just decoration for a princess. My real job is to marry whoever will strengthen political alliances and produce royal heirs." She laughed bitterly. "I was on my way to meet my future husband when the sabotage happened. Maybe they did me a favor." "Wait, your own people tried to kill you to stop a marriage?" "Political factions. Some think the marriage will make us too dependent on our allies. Others believe I am too contaminated by foreign ideas to be a proper royal wife." Kira's scales shifted to a darker silver. "They may be right about that last part." Minho felt an unexpected surge of anger on her behalf. "That's insane. You're probably the smartest person I've ever met, and they want to waste that on some arranged marriage?" The compliment seemed to genuinely surprise her. "You think I am intelligent? Are you kidding? The way you figured out how to merge our biosystems with my mechanical ones? I've been engineering for 15 years, and I never would have thought of that approach." For the first time since he'd known her, Kira actually smiled. It transformed her entire face, making her look younger and more human somehow. "What about you?" she asked. How does a brilliant engineer end up alone in a salvage ship in the outer rim? Minho's jaw tightened. He'd been dreading this question. Long story. We appear to have time. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. I used to design defense systems for the colonial fleet. Had a wife, a daughter, a nice house on New Sol. Thought I was building a better future. His voice got quieter. Then the Zephyrian raiders hit our colony. My defense systems failed. Everyone I loved died because I wasn't good enough. Kira's expression softened. I am sorry for your loss. After that, I couldn't handle being around people, couldn't handle the responsibility of other lives depending on my work. So I became a salvage operator. Out here, if I mess up, only I pay the price. But you saved me, Kira pointed out gently. Yeah, well, that was before I knew you were royalty with people trying to kill you. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Kira spoke again. We are both running from our lives, are we not? You from responsibility, me from obligation. Minho looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the alien features to the person underneath. Someone who understood what it felt like to be trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Yeah, he said quietly. I guess we are. It started with small things. Kira began moving slower, her usual graceful movements becoming clumsy. Her silver scales, normally bright and shimmering, started to look dull and lifeless. Minho noticed, but didn't say anything at first. Altarians were tough, he figured. She'd bounce back. Then one morning he found her collapsed on the floor of the engine room. Kira! He dropped his tools and rushed to her side. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, and her skin felt burning hot to the touch. Her eyes fluttered. Open, but they seemed unfocused. Cannot breathe properly, she whispered. The air, wrong mixture. Minho's heart sank. He'd been so focused on keeping them both alive that he hadn't considered the atmospheric differences between their species. Humans could survive on a wide range of oxygen levels, but Altarians needed specific gas mixtures that their biology had evolved with over millions of years. Okay, don't panic, he said, more to himself than to her. I can fix this. But fixing it meant crawling into the most dangerous part of the ship's ventilation system while the engines were still running. One wrong move, one slip of his hand, and the entire atmospheric system could fail. They'd both die in minutes. Minho looked down at Kira's pale face and made his choice. For the next 6 hours, he worked in conditions that would have killed him if he'd made a single mistake. The heat in the ventilation shafts was unbearable, and toxic gases leaked from damaged pipes. He had to manually recalibrate every atmospheric processor, adjusting the chemical mixtures by hand, while deadly fumes swirled around him. Twice he almost passed out from gas exposure. Once, a pipe burst right next to his head, filling his helmet with smoke. But he kept working, driven by the image of Kira lying helpless on the engine room floor. When he finally crawled out of the ventilation system, his hands were burned, his clothes were torn, and he could barely stand. But the atmospheric readings were perfect for Altarian physiology. Kira's recovery took 3 days. Minho barely left her side, bringing her water, checking her temperature, and adjusting the atmospheric controls whenever her condition changed. He rigged up a comfortable sleeping area for her using salvaged cushions and blankets from both ships. You did not have to do this, she said on the second day, when she was finally strong enough to sit up. Yeah, I did, Minho replied, checking the readouts on his medical scanner. We're in this together now. But you could have died. Your people barely know mine. We have been enemies more often than allies. Minho shrugged. You're not my enemy. You're just... Kira. Something changed in her expression when he said that. The suspicious, guarded look she'd worn since they first met began to fade away. As she got stronger, they talked more. Kira told him about Altarian poetry, their complex musical traditions, and their philosophy of interconnected consciousness. Minho shared stories about human resilience, the way his people had spread across the galaxy through pure stubbornness and determination. Your species is remarkable, she said one evening as they watched the stars through the viewport. You adapt to anything. On my world, if conditions change too much, we simply die. But humans, you find a way to survive. Sometimes survival isn't enough, Minho said quietly. Sometimes you need something worth surviving for. Kira looked at him with those glowing blue eyes, and Minho felt something shift between them. The careful distance they'd maintained was crumbling, replaced by something warmer and more dangerous. What is worth surviving for, she asked. Minho met her gaze and felt his heart start racing. I'm still figuring that out. The solar storm hit without warning. Minho was working on the communication array when the first wave of radiation slammed into their ships. Every screen flickered, sparks flew from the control panels, and then everything went dark. No, no, no. Minho frantically tried to restart the systems, but it was too late. The delicate electronics that had taken them weeks to repair were fried beyond recognition. This can't be happening. Kira rushed over from her workstation, her face pale with understanding. How bad is it? Minho stared at the smoking remains of their only connection to the outside world. We're looking at months to rebuild this, maybe longer, and that's if we can even find the right parts in the salvage. They both knew what this meant. Their supplies were already running low. The recycling systems were holding together with spare parts and hope. Without rescue coming soon, they might not survive long enough to fix the communication array. For the first time since the crisis began, Kira completely broke down. It started as quiet sobbing, but quickly escalated into full-blown panic. She slumped against the wall, her whole body shaking as the reality of their situation hit her. All her royal composure, her scientific training, her careful emotional control, it all crumbled at once. I was supposed to be home by now, she gasped between sobs. My father must think I am dead. The political situation, without the marriage alliance, there could be war. Millions could die because I failed. Minho watched her fall apart and felt something break inside his chest. For weeks he'd seen her as this strong, intelligent, almost otherworldly being. Now she just looked young and scared and completely human in her despair. He took a step toward her, then stopped. The taboo, the forbidden contact. But seeing her like this, knowing she was suffering alone because of cultural rules that seemed ridiculous in their current situation, Kira, he said softly. She looked up at him with those glowing eyes, now dim with tears. I cannot do this anymore. I cannot pretend to be strong when I am so afraid. That decided it. Minho crossed the distance between them and, ignoring every warning voice in his head, wrapped his arms around her trembling shoulders. He expected her to pull away, to retreat in horror like she had the first time they'd accidentally touched. Instead, she melted into his embrace, pressing her face against his chest as her sobs intensified. I've got you, he whispered, stroking her silver hair. We're going to figure this out. Together. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the dim emergency lighting. Minho could feel the warmth of her skin through her thin clothing, could smell the strange floral scent that seemed to follow her everywhere. Her breathing gradually slowed, and her trembling stopped. This is forbidden, she whispered against his chest, but she made no move to pull away. A lot of things are forbidden, Minho replied. Doesn't make them wrong. Kira lifted her head to look at him, and Minho felt his breath catch. Her face was inches from his, and something had changed in her expression. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else, something that made his heart race. What is happening to us? She asked quietly. I don't know, he admitted, but I know I don't want to face this alone anymore. Neither did she, apparently. Instead of pulling away, she settled more comfortably against him, her head on his shoulder. They sat together in the quiet darkness, two beings from different worlds finding comfort in each other's presence. Outside, the solar storm raged on, but inside their tiny refuge, something new was beginning. Something that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with the inexplicable connection growing between them. For the first time in years, Minho wasn't running from responsibility. He was running towards something instead. After the solar storm, everything changed between them. The careful distance they'd maintained for weeks disappeared overnight. Kira no longer retreated to the far corner when Minho entered a room. He found himself looking forward to their conversations, to the way her eyes lit up when she explained something fascinating about Altarian science. They were sharing dinner 3 days later, another meal of protein bars and recycled water, when it happened. Kira was telling him about the bioluminescent gardens on her homeworld, her hands moving gracefully as she described flowers that glowed like stars. Minho found himself watching her face instead of listening to her words, captivated by the way her expressions shifted like quicksilver. "You are not listening," she said suddenly, catching him staring. "Sorry, I was just—" Minho felt heat rise in his cheeks. "You're beautiful when you talk about home." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Kira's scales shimmered, shifting to a warmer silver tone he'd never seen before. They looked at each other across the small table, and the air between them seemed to crackle with electricity. "Minho," she whispered. He leaned forward without thinking. She met him halfway. Their lips touched softly, tentatively, and Minho felt like the universe had suddenly rearranged itself around that single point of contact. The kiss lasted only a few seconds before Kira jerked away, her eyes wide with horror. "No, no, no!" She scrambled backward, nearly knocking over her chair. "What have I done? This violates every sacred law of my people." "Kira, wait. Interspecies contact of this nature is forbidden. If the council discovers this, I will be stripped of all rank, exiled, possibly executed." Her breathing was rapid and panicked. "You do not understand what we have just done." Minho stood up slowly, keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. "You're right, I don't understand your laws, but I understand this. We're alone out here, probably going to die, and the only real thing in this whole mess is what I feel when I'm with you." "It does not matter what you feel. The laws exist for good reasons." "Whose laws?" Minho interrupted. "We're not on your world or mine. We're in the middle of nowhere, with no government, no council, no authority, except what we decide for ourselves." Kira stared at him, her scales flickering between silver and pale blue. "You cannot simply ignore thousands of years of tradition. Watch me." Minho took a careful step closer. "Out here in this tin can floating in space, we make our own rules. And my rule is that I care about you more than I care about what some council of politicians thinks about it. It is not that simple. It is exactly that simple." Another step. "Kira, when you were sick, when I thought I might lose you, nothing else mattered. Not your species, not mine, not politics or tradition or any of it. Just you." She was crying now, silver tears tracking down her scaled cheeks. "If we are rescued, if we return to civilization, this can never be. My life is not my own to give. Then we'll deal with that when it happens," Minho said gently. "Right now it's just us, just two people who found something real in the middle of all this chaos." Kira looked at him for a long moment, and Minho could see the war raging behind her glowing eyes. Duty against desire, tradition against emotion, fear against hope. Finally, she whispered, "What if rescue never comes?" "Then we have whatever time we have left," Minho said, "and we can spend it pretending we don't feel this, or we can spend it being honest about what's happening between us." Kira closed her eyes, took a shuddering breath, and when she opened them again, something had shifted. The panic was still there, but underneath it was determination. "In the void between worlds," she said quietly, "we make our own rules." "Our own rules," Minho agreed. This time, when he reached for her, she didn't pull away. The beeping started at 600 hours, jolting Minho awake from the first peaceful sleep he'd had in months. For a moment, he thought it was another system malfunction. Then he saw the scanner display and his blood turned to ice. 2 ships, coming fast. "Kira." He shook her gently awake. She'd been sleeping curled against his side, something that had become natural over the past few weeks. "We've got company." She sat up instantly, her training kicking in. One look at the scanner told her everything she needed to know. "Human military vessel, and that's the Altarian Royal Fleet signature." They stared at each other in the dim light of the emergency systems. After 2 months of isolation, rescue should have been cause for celebration. Instead, it felt like a death sentence. "How long?" Kira asked quietly. Minho checked the readings. 6 hours, maybe 7. They're both pushing their engines hard. 6 hours to decide the rest of their lives. Kira moved to the communication console and activated the incoming messages. Her father's face appeared on screen first. stern, regal, and furious. Minho couldn't understand the rapid Altarian speech, but the tone was unmistakable. Royal displeasure at its finest. The human message was more straightforward. Captain Lee Minho, this is Admiral Park of the Colonial Defense Force. Respond immediately with your status. Your commission is hereby reactivated for debriefing and reassignment. Reactivated. Minho stared at the screen. I resigned from the military years ago. Emergency protocols, Kira said softly. During wartime, they can conscript anyone with useful skills. She paused the Altarian message and looked at him with haunted eyes. My father says the marriage negotiations have continued in my absence. Duke Veltar is aboard the rescue ship, eager to finally meet his bride. The weight of reality crashed down on them. Minho sank into his chair, running his hands through his hair. So that's it then. You go back to your arranged marriage and diplomatic duties. I get dragged back into military service. And we pretend none of this ever happened. The alternative is... Kira's voice trailed off. What? What's the alternative? She turned away from him, staring out at the approaching ships. There is no alternative. I am the crown princess of the Altarian Empire. My marriage will prevent a war that could kill millions. How can I choose my own happiness over so many lives? And I'm apparently a conscripted military engineer again, Minho said bitterly. Probably headed straight back to designing weapons systems I swore I'd never touch again. They worked in silence for the next few hours, preparing their ships for docking, gathering their personal belongings, trying to avoid talking about what came next. But the tension was unbearable. Finally, with the rescue ships only 2 hours, away Kira broke. I cannot do this, she said suddenly, her voice cracking. I cannot go back to that life pretending to be something I am not, married to someone I do not even know, when I have found... She gestured helplessly between them. Found. What? Minho asked gently. You, she whispered. I have found you and myself and a happiness I never knew was possible. How do I give that up? Minho felt something fierce and desperate rise in his chest. Then don't. It is not that simple. Why not? He grabbed her hands, ignoring the old taboos that no longer seemed to matter. Why can't it be that simple? Why can't we just choose ourselves for once? Because people will die if I do not fulfill my duty. And people will die if I go back to building weapons. People always die, Kira. The question is whether we're going to live. The scanner beeped again. 1 hour until docking. 1 hour to choose between duty and love, between the lives they were born into and the life they'd discovered together. 1 hour to decide if they were brave enough to rewrite their own story. With 30 minutes left before the rescue ships arrived, Kira stood at the communication console with her hand hovering over the transmit button. She'd recorded her message 3 times, each version more final than the last. I, Princess Kira Velnuth, first daughter of the Altarian crown, do hereby formally renounce all royal titles, privileges, and claims to succession, her recorded voice said from the speakers. I request political asylum aboard the human vessel and renounce all allegiance to the Altarian Empire. Minho watched her face as she listened to her own words. She looked pale but determined, like someone about to jump off a cliff with no guarantee of safe landing. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. No, she admitted. But I'm sure that I cannot go back to that life. Not after finding this. She gestured between them. I choose you, Minho. I choose us. She reached for the transmit button, but Minho caught her wrist. Wait, he said. Something had been eating at him for the past hour, a growing certainty that this was wrong. Not their feelings. Those were real and right and the best thing that had ever happened to him. But this solution, this choice was wrong. Kira, what happens when you send that message? She looked confused. I become a political refugee. The humans will have to grant me sanctuary, at least temporarily. And then what? You'll be trapped in human space, cut off from your family, your culture, everything you've ever known. You'll be dependent on the goodwill of a species you barely understand. I will be free, she said firmly. Will you? Minho shook his head. You'll be a former princess working whatever job they'll give you, probably under constant surveillance because you know state secrets. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering if Altarian agents are coming for you. Kira's expression wavered. It is better than a loveless marriage. Is it better than never seeing your home again? Never speaking your own language with someone who truly understands it? Never seeing those bioluminescent gardens you told me about? Tears began forming in her glowing eyes. What are you saying? Min-ho took her hands in his mind racing. I'm saying there's another option, a third choice. What? He nodded toward the viewport where their jury-rigged salvage ship floated alongside the damaged Altarian transport. We disappear. What do you mean? I mean, we take my ship and vanish into the frontier territories. No human authority, no Altarian empire, no laws except the ones we make ourselves. His words came faster as the idea took shape. There are whole sectors out there that haven't been mapped yet. Worlds where no government has any power. We could build a life there, Kira stared at him. That is insane. Yeah, it is. But it's also the only way we both get to choose our own path. What about your military commission? They will hunt you as a deserter. Min-ho laughed bitterly. Let them try. I know more about military tracking systems than most of their officers. And in the outer territories, military authority is just a suggestion anyway. And my father? My people? We send them a message. Tell them you died in the original sabotage. Both rescue ships arrived too late. Everyone goes home thinking we're dead. The scanner showed 15 minutes until docking. Kira was shaking her head, but Min-ho could see the possibility lighting up in her eyes. It would mean giving up everything, she whispered. Everything except each other. We would be fugitives. We would be free. She looked out at the stars, then back at him. Where would we go? I know a place, Kepler's Edge, in the neutral zone. It's rough, dangerous, and completely lawless, perfect for two people who want to disappear. The rescue ships were close enough. Now that Min-ho could see their running lights, 10 minutes to make the most important decision of their lives. Kira, he said softly. I've spent 5 years running from responsibility, from connection, from everything that mattered. But I'm not running anymore. I'm choosing. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing us. And I'm choosing a future where we write our own story. She looked at him with those incredible glowing eyes, and Min-ho saw the moment she made her choice. Kepler's Edge, she said quietly. Tell me about this place. With 5 minutes left before the rescue ships arrived, Min-ho and Kira worked frantically to execute their desperate plan. They had one shot at this, and if they got it wrong, they'd spend the rest of their lives separated by the vast machinery of interstellar politics. The debris field, Min-ho muttered as he programmed the false distress beacon. We'll hide in the asteroid field and trigger an explosion. Make it look like both ships were destroyed in a secondary blast. Kira was downloading every file she could from her ship's computer. I am stealing 2 months of royal correspondence and diplomatic codes. If we are caught, this will be considered high treason. If we're caught, treason will be the least of our problems. The rescue ships were close enough now that Min-ho could see individual windows. The Altarian vessel was sleek and elegant, all curved lines and organic shapes. The human military ship was angular and aggressive, bristling with weapons. Both represented the worlds they were about to leave behind forever. Message ready, Kira announced, her fingers flying over the controls. It will broadcast on all frequencies in 30 seconds. Min-ho activated the beacon he'd rigged from spare parts. When it exploded, it would send out a massive electromagnetic pulse and debris signature that would look exactly like a catastrophic ship failure. To anyone scanning from a distance, it would appear that both the salvage vessel and the royal transport had been destroyed. You sure about this? He asked one last time. Kira looked at him with those glowing blue eyes, and for a moment he saw not the alien princess or the brilliant scientist, but simply the woman who had chosen to trust him with her life. I have never been more certain of anything, she said. They initiated the sequence together. The fake distress message began broadcasting. Mayday, Mayday, this is Princess Kira Velneth. Hull breach critical. Explosion imminent. Tell my father I died with honor. Captain Lee, your sacrifice will not be forgotten. Both vessels lost. No survivors. The beacon exploded in a brilliant flash, sending debris and electromagnetic interference across the sensor arrays of both rescue ships. In the confusion, Min-ho fired up his salvage ship's engines and slipped away into the asteroid field. using the rocks as cover. They held their breath as the rescue ships swept the area with their scanners. For 20 agonizing minutes, they waited in the shadow of a massive asteroid while search teams combed through the debris. Finally, both ships began to withdraw, apparently satisfied that there were no survivors to rescue. "It worked," Kira whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "Phase 1 worked," Minho corrected. "Now comes the hard part." They waited until the rescue ships were gone, then began their journey toward the frontier territories. As they left the civilized sectors behind, Minho felt a familiar sensation, the mixture of terror and exhilaration that came with stepping into the unknown. But this time, he wasn't running away from something. He was running toward something better. "Kepler's Edge is 3 weeks away," he told Kira as they settled into their course. "It's not going to be easy. No fancy technology, no servants, no safety net, just us and whatever we can build with our own hands." Kira was studying the star charts with intense concentration. What do people do there? How do they survive? Mining, trading, salvage work, whatever pays. Some run cargo between the settled worlds and the frontier. Others set up farms on the habitable planets. A few become explorers, mapping new systems. Minho grinned. Lot of opportunities for a princess with 3 degrees and an engineer who knows how to fix anything. "Former princess," Kira corrected. "I am just Kira now." "Just Kira," Minho agreed. "And I'm just Minho. 2 people making their own way in the universe." As their ship accelerated toward the edge of known space, they watched the familiar constellations fade behind them. Ahead lay uncharted territory, worlds that had never known the touch of empire or the weight of ancient laws. "Are you afraid?" Kira asked softly. Minho considered the question seriously. "Yeah, but I'm more excited than afraid. For the first time in years, I get to choose what happens next." Kira smiled and took his hand, no longer worried about cultural taboos or royal protocols. "Then let us choose together." Outside their small ship, the stars wheeled endlessly through the void, indifferent to the boundaries that civilizations drew on their maps. In the vast emptiness between worlds, 2 beings from different species had found something that transcended politics and prejudice and duty. They had found each other, and they had chosen love over law, freedom over convention, and hope over fear. It was, Minho thought, as he watched Kira plot their course to the frontier, the most human thing either of them had ever done. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.